and welcome to The Truth Will Not Be Silenced, the show that allows Black people to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. I'm your host, Melissa Woodfork White. In today's episode, we will talk about renting and buying property and the inequalities with Maeyonna Riggs. We'll discuss the controversial topic of inequalities and to bring awareness of the disparities in buying and renting property that needs to be shared, that allows us to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. As a Black professional woman with over 28 years in the workforce, I have personally experienced the inequalities of renting and buying property because of the color of my skin. Sharing our stories allows us to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. There will be a special surprise at the end of the show. Be sure to listen all the way through for the details. Our guest today is Maeyonna Riggs. May was born in Gary, Indiana, the youngest of 4 children. She has an associate degree in accounting from the Community College of Aurora, a bachelor's degree in communications from the Metropolitan State University of Denver, and a master's degree in early childhood education and early childhood special education from Arizona's own Grand Canyon University. She is a world traveler and has lived in Guadalajara, Mexico. May is and has been a business owner and property manager for more than 11 years. She is going to share with us about property management and the inequalities. Hello, May. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So May, tell us, how is renting and buying property different due to a person's race?
Well, when you are buying property as a person of color, it's very important to be aware of the Fair Housing Act. Unfortunately, in the past, and also there are current situations where people of color have gone to purchase properties and they are not allowed to purchase properties in certain areas or discouraged to purchase properties in certain areas. So the federal government stepped in, making a law that's called the Fair Housing Act, so that people of color would be able to still have the opportunity to purchase where they want and not be discriminated against. But unfortunately, the law exists for a reason. So sometimes we need to make sure that law is implemented if you feel that you are experiencing discrimination.
So basically, because people were being discriminated and told where they could live and where they couldn't live, the government had to intervene with the Fair Housing Act to provide equality and fairness in renting and buying property. And so it's very unfortunate, but this is American history. This is what has happened. This is what is taking place. And this is what had to be done to ensure people could live where they want to live, purchase where they want to purchase, and rent where they want to rent. So how have you experienced these inequalities and disparities in renting and buying property due to the color of your skin?
Unfortunately, I have experienced redlining, which is when they want people of color to purchase in a specific area, their quote unquote area. For example, in Arizona, the red line district is all of the property south of Van Buren. So if you live south of Van Buren, they encourage people of color to purchase in that area. And if you are getting above Van Buren, then that is not where they would like you to purchase, unfortunately. So redlining is illegal. It is definitely against the law. So if you experience that, you can take action by making a complaint with the Federal Housing Agency and also following through with that complaint. But just being aware of it will also help you, because if your realtor is kind of deter you from a certain area, you may want to ask yourself why.
Yes. So tell us your experience.
So I actually had a rental property in Colorado, and I'd been renting that out for quite some time, and then I decided that I wanted to sell it, but it happened to be in the middle of the recession, and so I got a little bit behind on my HOA. Well, the HOA came after me like nobody's business, And they ended up charging me over $20,000 in fees and dues to actually be able to sell my home. Even though I had a buyer, they postponed that purchase date because they were still trying to collect HOA money from me that I had paid. And every time I would pay it, they would up the price. And they would even avoid taking payments from me because they didn't want me to pay up the dues. They actually wanted me to foreclose so they could take advantage of having my home that I owned free and clear. Mm-hmm. So I did everything I could to get them paid off. I had a buyer. I ended up selling. I got through the event, but while I was going through it, I had a neighbor who was also behind on the HOA. Mm-hmm. And this was a white neighbor, and they negotiated with that neighbor properly. And they just allowed him to pay an extra $100 a month until his dues were paid off over the course of several years. And I thought to myself, that has to be white privilege because they didn't offer me anything like that. And so it was really
$20,000, May? $20,000?
Oh, yeah, I paid over $20,000. But at that point, I just wanted it done. I wanted to sell and get out of there and go on with my life. And it cost me a pretty penny.
Yes. And that's very unfortunate because it happens to a lot of us. And so thank you for sharing your experience because it lets us know that it's still happening today. You own that property free and clear. Mm-hmm. But there was a clause in the HOA that says that if you came behind on your HOA fees and dues, that they could foreclose on your property. So basically, you have these white people trying to foreclose on a Black lady's property so that they can get the property free and clear. Is that what I'm hearing, May?
That's right. Absolutely.
And I'm glad that you were able to work your way through that. But once again, you're letting us know, pick and choose your battles because you wanted to sell and you were not going to let them take your property
right
free and clear when you had already paid for the property due to getting behind on your HOA fees and dues. Well, I too have a similar experience. Not one with the, it is a similar experience because it was with our HOA. So as May just shared with the listeners and viewers, about the redlining, I live below that line. I live on the south side of Phoenix, where predominantly Black and brown people live, stay, and work. So with that being said, we bought our house on this side of town. The people that we bought the house from, they were non-Black. They had owned the house for years before we bought the house. So we had a very good real estate agent. And we also had a very good mortgage lender, Black professional woman. And when I tell you that she anticipated everything that could possibly happen to get us ready, she was on it. Just like what you had shared with us about knowing and being prepared and so forth. Well, she did all of that. So what had happened is that prior to closing on our house, our real estate agent had the HOA pulled to see if they owed anything to make sure that they paid it before we purchased and closed on the house. So with that being said, he pulled the record from all of the years that they owned the house. They did not have one violation for not having green on the grass. And the lawn, the front lawn, didn't have any green. It had absolutely no green. So with that being said, after we purchased the house, 6 months after moving in, we got a violation for not having green on the grass.
Oh my gosh.
And I said to my husband, that's discrimination. Because when we pulled that record, there was no record of them ever having received a violation for having no green on the front lawn. And let me tell you something, we have pictures. There was no green, May, on the front lawn. But within 6 months of us buying and moving into this house, we got a violation for not having green on the lawn. So we filed a racial discrimination complaint with the HOA. We had already met and interacted with the HOA. They are all white Caucasians, okay? They are non-Black people, okay? So with that being said, we knew who we were dealing with. So we filed a racial discrimination complaint, provided all of our documentation, and we spent over $500 to get somebody to come out here and treat the front lawn to get it to grow because it had been barren for years.
Wow.
And so with that being said, when we filed our racial discrimination complaint, against our HOA for that violation, provided all our documentation showing that prior to us purchasing that house, we understand that we incur everything once you purchase a home.
Right.
But our complaint was that here's their HOA record for every year that they stayed here, and you never issued them a fine for not having green on the grass. And there had not been green on that front lawn for years because we had an appraisal done. We had everything checked out prior to that, nothing. So we filed a racial discrimination complaint, May. They ignored our racial discrimination complaint. They wouldn't address it. They wouldn't respond to it. They would nothing. Their thing was like, well, according to our HOA, the response that we did get, they didn't address the racial discrimination complaint, but the response that we did get was that according to HOA guidelines, you're supposed to have X, Y, and Z. You don't have that. That's a violation, fine. So they totally ignored the fact that the non-Black family that lived here for all those years before our Black family moved in, they never issued them a fine for not having green on the lawn. So long story short, May, is that we had to file a complaint through the government, the housing authority, the federal housing authority, and then finally they addressed the complaint. So what happened is that when the government got involved, all of a sudden, the person that had issued us that violation was no longer working for the HOA management company. That was a white Caucasian lady who issued us that fine when we filed the complaint with the federal government about racial discrimination in housing and provided all our documentation, the same documentation and pictures, because we have before pictures. When you take a picture, it's time stamped and dated.
Right.
So we have pictures before pictures. And so of that lawn and so forth prior to us buying this house. And we provided the documentation that said that all the years that they lived in this house, you all never fined them for the lawn. So with that being said, when the government got in, all of a sudden the person that issued us the fine and those persons working in that office were no longer working in that office. And so I know, my husband knows, our family knows that we were targeted by our HOA because we're Black. And not only that, we have a prime, the house that we purchased is on a corner lot. The houses, as you know, being a property manager, those houses are bigger in square footage inside the house and outside the house when you are on a corner lot. And so with that being said, that was the first time I experienced the racial discrimination. Yeah, discrimination. And I just but I'll tell you now, because of that whole experience, we haven't gotten a single violation. Mm-hmm. Because I'm you're not going to single us out. You're not going to target us. You're not going to do any of that just because we are a Black family who has purchased this house. We're not renters. We flat out bought this house. And so with that being said, we had to let them know, but we had to use the federal government to let them know. So now they're hesitant when they issue violations and so forth. But I'll tell you something, we haven't had any.
And that's so good. And I always encourage people to stay ahead of their HOA. Don't just pay your regular monthly dues. Stay 2 or 3 months ahead in case you do get a violation. Mm-hmm. Because if you do get a violation and you get behind on your dues, if within 3 months, they can start the process of foreclosure. Mm-hmm. And then the next month you can be on the auction block, and the HOAs can do that. They have the authority to do that. A lot of people don't know. Even if you don't have a mortgage on that home, they can still come in within 3 to 4 months and snatch it from you. So it's so important to stay ahead. Yes, you may not be guilty of the violation, but still pay your dues and pay the fines, still negotiate. But the negotiations could take time. Mm-hmm. And that means you could get behind. So always stay ahead while you're making your complaint. And while you're going through the process of trying to get them to refund you the unjust dues that they're charging you and the unjust fines.
And in addition to all of that wonderful knowledge that you just gave us, I'll tell you, with me and my husband, we do an automatic withdrawal. So we don't have to remember to pay our HOA. So we didn't get a fine because our HOA is up to par, but they did issue us a violation that said it could lead to a fine. And so that's when me and my husband jumped into action, like, hold up, wait a minute. We just bought this house and we just moved in, and y'all hitting us with something. And we know for a fact, because the people that we bought the house for, non-Black. And so with that being said, it was like, we had to let them know. And it's what you said, it does take some time. The government took over a year to investigate them. So, wow. And when they knew that we were going to go the distance, they have to make sure now that when they issue us a fine, that they are not targeting us.
Yep.
Now, mind you, we are one of, in where we live at on our block, because our house is a corner lot, we got white families to the right, white families to the left. So when we were issued this fine, of course, we went to go talk to our neighbors, just like you went to go talk to your neighbors. And we showed them what we had got, and they were like, they've been living there for years. They've never gotten one of those. And mind you, they're and the couple and their family, white couple and family that lives next door to us, they were nice enough to even say, we ain't cut these branches or trim these branches, and we haven't even
wow.
So that just goes to show, they didn't know that we were being racially targeted, but they let us know that they lived here for years longer than the couple that we bought the house from that lived here. They was here longer than that. And so that's why I was like, we ain't even been in our house for 6 months, and they hit us with a fine for no grass on, and they was like, and you want to know what else we found out? Across the street, there's no Black people that live across the street from us. Okay, so with that being said, they had patches in their lawn, and they never received a fine also.
Oh my gosh.
And so, like I said, we had to do what you said. We fought that battle, fought it, and we let them know we're not the ones. We worked hard. We pay our taxes. We're good law-abiding citizens. It should not matter the color of our skin. Money is green at the beginning, middle, and end of the day. So with that being said, May, how has your experiences affected you in how you property manage?
It has definitely made me very aware of the laws and regulations out there to assist with implementing those laws and regulations, because let's not ignore the fact that there's a huge wealth gap, and that wealth gap exists by small little things not being followed, as well as big things. For example, extra fees, extra fines, implementing a certain regulation on Black property managers or Black homeowners that you're not implementing on whites. And all of that is part of why there is this wealth gap that should not exist. If we didn't have these quote unquote extra circumstances to deal with that should never happen, if we were being treated fairly, then we could do more, we could have more. But the extra stress that comes with it, the extra finances that's taken to resolve these issues, they just have made me very aware. It's always good to have a good paralegal, somebody you can really speak to on a regular basis, as well as a really good lawyer. Not to mention the fact that if you're doing property management, you are the fiduciary for that property. You are representing the people who own that property. So you need to stay up on the regulations. You need to stay ahead of the game in regards to the new laws coming out, whether it's dealing with contracts involving the HOA, having copies of that on hand and being ready with the updates, or if it's just having the history of something, like your realtor had for you, getting the history of what was there before, what happened before, what were the fines, and kind of the challenges. So I mean, just staying knowledgeable, staying up to date is necessary because you don't want to just survive when you're a property management. You want to thrive. And how you do that is by cutting off the past and being prepared and being knowledgeable, and also having your resources readily available to you. Know the ARs for your state, know those regulations for the counties that you are working with, so that when you go to do something, when you have to implement an eviction, when you have to do all of these things, you're prepared on your end and you're able to shoot and score. Because you just never know what somebody's going to come up with because of the color of your skin. Unfortunately, I hate to say it. And we do have laws against it. We do have fair housing laws. We do have federal laws that prohibit people from discriminating, but they're still doing it. And being aware of it and trying to prepare yourself to tackle those things in advance is not going to do anything but help you and those around you.
Yes. And all of the wonderful things that you do as a property manager, you know, those were the things that our mortgage professional did in getting us ready and not wanting us to have to pay those additional fees and so forth. She made me and my husband already look good on paper. And on paper, you can't tell somebody's race.
Nope.
You know, very well educated, very well degreed, very well experienced, careers, not jobs, because you know there's a difference between having a job versus having a career, but that's another conversation. I'm not going to get off track. And so with that being said, how has recent events of racial discrimination in renting and buying changed how you manage, monitor, and oversee a property? And we're talking specifically appraisals, redlining, predatory lending. Now you touched on redlining. I want you to touch on appraisals, and I want you to touch on predatory lending.
Well, I'm definitely going to tell you about some experiences that have been going on recently. I'm sure you've read the articles. Listeners have probably already read the articles about people being appraised below value because of the color of their skins. And again, this is some of those low appraisals just due to the color of your skin is also part of the thing that leads to that wealth gap that we always talk about. So a lot of people have decided, hey, and I don't even blame them, because this is the world we live in. Unfortunately, they don't have time to do the battling and making those federal complaints. They need to get their home sold. You know, they're going through these transitions. So they have to ask a white friend to come in and pretend to be the homeowner as the appraisal is taking place. And that's so unfortunate. It definitely shouldn't be the case. But we're finding nowadays that may be the way you need to go so that you can get the additional funds that your house is actually valued at. And to be fairly evaluated for your home. Because unfortunately, sometimes when they see a person of color on the wall, on those pictures, they're going to decide, well, I'll just give you what I think you should have instead of what your property is actually worth.
Exactly. And you know what, that leads me into those national news stories where you had Black couples go on the news and share their stories about how when they got their first appraisal, they were there. All of their family photos were up. All of their culture and history was up. And then when they got the appraisal back, it was well below what their house was worth.
Yeah.
And so they experienced firsthand that, okay, so now I'm going to take down everything in my house. So you talked about how they have a white friend come over and pretend like they're the homeowners to get a better. Well, we're going to talk about how these Black couples, because there have been a few on national news that share the story. And these stories have also been written in news stories where they shared their stories. Well, the second time they went to go get an appraisal, they took down all of their family photos. They removed all the Blackness, all the Black history, all the Black culture from the home. So when the house was appraised the second time, it was appraised well above what the house was worth. So that lets you know right then and there that it's still happening today. And I'll tell you something else, May. With my parents, I didn't notice it at the time, but when they got one of their homes appraised, is that I noticed that there wasn't a lot of family pictures up and so forth. And my mother had a lot of artwork on the walls in every room. And I didn't know that at the time, because, you know, our parents that grew up doing those Jim Crow segregation and civil rights, it's such a painful time in Black history that they don't want to talk about that or pass it down. And so with that being said, I didn't know at the time that that's what they were doing. They were trying to make sure that they got the full value of their home when they did the appraisal, because they knew firsthand what was going to happen if they had all of our family photos up and if they were present. Now, mind you, they weren't present. So it was a real estate person
Right.
who came and showed the house. And so there you have it. And I'll share with you another example. Once again, my parents were the target, and I know you're going to touch on this next, predatory lending. I'm from the suburbs in Chicago. So when my parents moved down from the northwest suburbs in Chicago to Atlanta, Georgia, the first house that they got, they did not know that they were getting a floating mortgage. My parents did not understand what a floating mortgage was until they got the house and saw how their payments went from $200-300 to $1,200, $1,300, and $1,400 a month. They were the victims of predatory lending. Can you talk about that, May?
Yeah, you definitely want to be doing your research when you decide on who you're going to lend with. Look at their reviews online, check interest rates, prepare your credit in advance. And also check with credit unions. If you go in prepared, asking for a decent rate, showing the qualifications necessary, it is illegal for them to tell you no. So there are specific loans that you should definitely get that are not going to be an arm that continues to raise over the next few years. Avoid those types of loans. Definitely go with lower interest rates, preferably from a credit union or maybe a bank that you've been with for a long time and have a good relationship with, that's going to give you a really good rate. Also, first-time lending programs, be aware of which one you choose. Some of them have insurances where if you lose your job, they're still going to cover your mortgage. So just be aware of that.
And so I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was thinking about that PMI, the one that doesn't cover you, but that covers the lender. And so that's another thing that they use to discriminate against home buyers, because they make you pay those extra fees to cover. Well, why do I have to pay that? And a person that doesn't look like me doesn't have to pay that, because you put in that PMI so that, and for those of you that don't know, that's insurance that covers the lender that is mortgaging, that you're paying the mortgage for your house to. Am I correct? May I just want to make sure I got that right. So with that being said, people can buy houses without PMI. But most Black people and people of color, when they go to buy a house, they want to tack in that PMI, which is an extra fee on top. You mentioned that earlier, all those additional fees just because of a person's color. Well, that's one.
Yep. And then with PMIs, it also depends on the type of loan that you signed it for in the contract. That's why it's so important to be aware. Some loans will drop that off after you pay a certain amount. Other loans don't implement that at all. So you have to be aware of what you're getting yourself into and have that advocate, that paralegal that you can depend on and that's trustworthy, that lawyer you can talk to things about. These are things that the extra steps we should take to just be knowledgeable and protect ourselves as we're purchasing homes and as we're taking on these loans. Even if it's a VA loan, you should still read the fine print. You should still have somebody look over things.
Yeah. Because
who knows, you could be paying on principal balances and then later on they're sneaking that interest back in from the balance that was paid. So we've seen all of this come up in recent lawsuits over the past years with big banks. So you want to be aware of what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask for the summary of, I think it's called the summary of ultimation. I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong, but basically you can ask your local bank who you have a mortgage with to send you the payoff summary. and give you the outline of all the payments that you've made from the time you've been making them up until now. So that way you have a end date, like, oh, this is when I will fully pay off my home. So if I make these extra payments, this will bring my interest rate down twice a month. Speaking of that, there are ways to get rid of a mortgage quickly. You can make principal only payments. So yes, make your regular payment. Then either 10 days before or 5 days after you make that regular payment, go in and make a principal payment. Always keep the principal payment separate than your regular payment, because it's going to cut down the interest a second time. Also, allowing one extra payment each year in your mortgage at the end of the year, or just sometime throughout the year, one extra payment a year cuts down 10 years of a 30-year loan.
Yes. And that is so
You
true.
know, making double payments if you can. Every 2 weeks, making a big payment. All of that can help you build your financial wealth and get rid of those 30-year loans quickly.
And you know what, May? It's sad that we have to do all of these things in order to get ahead and to not have our properties foreclosed on us or taken from us after we've already invested all of our money into it. So with that being said, in combating all of these inequalities that people of color and Black people face in renting and buying property, these are the things that we have to do in addition so that we can stay ahead. Right. And it's sad, but it's the truth and it's our reality. So May, that brings us to our final question. How does sharing your story today about these inequalities and the disparities in renting and buying property help others? And I'm just going to be honest, you pretty much have answered this question throughout the whole podcast when you're saying educate yourself, read everything, save extra money. Just go ahead and just sum it all up for us.
Yeah, it is. With all of these things, you want to be prepared. You want to know the laws, look up those laws before you go into rent. Already call ahead and know what they need. How much does the deposit need to be? What type of credentials do you need to have? If you go in ready and looking good and ready, they're going to willingly accept you. Sometimes we have to play the game. We have to play the role. We have to, go that extra mile so that we can be treated fairly, unfortunately. And I hate to say it, but it is definitely the case today. But also, with knowing all of that and experiencing all that, don't devalue yourself. You're beautifully and wonderfully made. You're going to get through the process. You're going to have generational wealth to pass on when you purchase your home. It's a positive thing. Just remember who you are. Remember that one person's negative view should not define you, but God's view of you, which is that you're good and you're clean and you're wonderfully made, should define you. So just don't lose yourself in the discrimination that happens to you. Just lose yourself in positivity and the good things that are coming in your future, because God has good plans for you.
Amen. Thank you so much, May. Oh my goodness. You have so much experience, knowledge in this property management and renting and buying. And I thank you. Thank you for being on our show and sharing your experiences and sharing your professional knowledge and just educating us on the things that, unfortunately, as Black people and people of color, that we have to do if we want to get these things. And then
thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. Thank you. Next week, we'll continue to discuss controversial topics about race and have conversations about personal and professional experiences with racism, love, lost employment, and education. Stories that need to be shared, seen, and heard that makes us human. The truth will not be silenced. To be seen, to be heard, to be human. The surprise. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know we sent you and help support our show. Buzzsprout is the best way to launch a professional podcast. Want to ask a question, be a guest, or subscribe to this podcast, The Truth Will Not Be Silenced? Click on the show link. Thank you for joining us today.